Secrets, mysteries, and dangerous choices await you. But before we unravel every detail, subscribe to the channel and continue receiving stories that challenge your imagination. Ready to begin? The steel and glass building reflected the cloudy Manhattan sky that morning, as if it itself were in mourning. The impeccable facade, a symbol of power and wealth, contrasted sharply with the silent turmoil seething within Ethan Caldwell, one of the youngest and most successful executives in the American real estate industry. At 39, Ethan occupied the top floor of Caldwell Horizons, a company he had partially inherited from his father but had expanded with his own hands, transforming small developments into urban giants. To everyone else, he was a winner. To himself that morning, he was a broken man. The elevator descended slowly, more slowly than usual, he thought, and the mirror on the brushed steel wall reflected his devastated expression. His impeccable suit, tailored with almost surgical precision, seemed out of place against his lost gaze, and the strands of hair that were disheveled for the first time in a long time. Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose, taking a deep breath, trying to control the trembling in his hands. His cell phone vibrated incessantly in his pocket. Shareholders, press, lawyers, his assistant, everyone wanted answers. He had none. Hours earlier, the news had broken, a gigantic financial hole involving one of the company's most ambitious projects. Risky investments, aggressive moves, and blind trust in a partner who was now missing had put everything at risk. The press called it the unexpected collapse of Caldwell Horizons. Ethan called it the end. The elevator stopped suddenly between two floors. He pressed the emergency button without any real hurry. In fact, part of him was grateful for the delay. Fewer minutes until facing the legal team. Fewer minutes until looking his sister, his only close family, in the eye and admitting that they might lose everything they had built. Fewer minutes until facing the board and confirming live to the whole country that yes, the Caldwell family fortune was about to evaporate. It was then that he let slip something he almost never allowed himself to, a tear, then another. And before he knew it, his whole body was trembling, as if decades of self-control had crumbled all at once. He turned to the wall, trying to hide his face, even though there was no one there. It was instinctive. Vulnerability for Ethan had always been forbidden. The elevator started moving again, and he quickly wiped his face with his jacket sleeve. The door opened on the 8th floor. He expected to see some employee or messenger, but no. It was just a lady in a cleaning uniform, pushing a cart of simple, worn-out products. She was about 60-something, maybe older, with skin marked by deep wrinkles and attentive, tired but kind eyes. "Good morning, sir," she said with a slight polite smile, not immediately noticing anything. Ethan forced a nod. She went inside, pressed the button for another floor, and turning her face to him, noticed the swelling around my eyes, the redness, my hand still trembling slightly. She didn't ask anything. She didn't make any inappropriate comments. She simply observed, like someone who had seen a lot of other people's pain in her life, real pain, not the kind that's masked behind expensive suits. The following seconds were filled with absolute silence, but not an uncomfortable silence. It was a curious silence, as if the atmosphere had changed density. The elevator stopped again. The doors opened, but remained open longer than they should have, as if the sensor were detecting something invisible. And then the cleaning lady did something unexpected. She placed her hand on Ethan's shoulder, a simple but firm gesture, and said, with a calmness that seemed to pass through the air like a warm blanket, "Sometimes, when the world falls apart, it's because you were carrying too much on your own." He blinked, confused. No one ever spoke to him like that. No one touched him like that. No one dared to say anything that wasn't measured, formal, conscious of their position. But that unknown woman with a name tag that read Marjorie spoke as if she could see beyond the suit, beyond the company, beyond the headlines. She didn't know who he was. Or maybe she did and didn't care. It was hard to say. Before Ethan could answer, the elevator doors closed again. She didn't insist. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't suggest miraculous solutions. She simply said that and remained silent. A welcoming silence, not a suffocating one. For the first time that morning, Ethan took a deep breath without feeling any pain in his chest. The door opened on the ground floor. He got out. She remained in the elevator. And strange as it seemed, that simple gesture had stirred something within him, as if someone had put back in place, even if only for a second, a piece of him that had been out of place. The world outside continued to crumble, but inside, something tiny had changed. The next day, as Manhattan awoke to its fast-paced, chaotic rhythm, Ethan Caldwell walked through the Caldwell Horizons lobby like a ghost no one dared acknowledge. Employees looked away, not out of disrespect, but out of fear. Fear of witnessing firsthand the collapse of someone who had always been synonymous with absolute control. The company occupied 38 floors of a skyscraper in Midtown. The mirrored building, designed by one of the country's most renowned architects, was a symbol of innovation and ambition. The lobby, with its polished marble floor, felt cold that day. The metallic sheen reflected not its former grandeur, but an invisible tension that permeated every step. Brittany, Ethan's assistant, approached quickly. Young, competent, and always impeccable, she gripped a stack of documents too tightly, as if afraid they might slip away. "Ethan," she began, but her voice faltered. "The board moved the meeting forward to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The press is putting pressure on them. The FBI has requested access to Mr. Morris's accounts." The name hit Ethan like a direct blow. Richard Morris, his partner and longtime friend, had disappeared 2 days earlier, leaving behind enough clues to incriminate him, but not enough to locate his whereabouts. The exodus of investors was immediate. "Get everything ready," Ethan said, his voice uninflected, "and find out if my sister has arrived yet." Brittany nodded and hurried out, letting Ethan continue down the main hallway. Each wall displayed photographs of grand projects, revitalized skyscrapers, entire neighborhoods transformed, multi-million-dollar contracts signed with confident smiles. Now it seemed like an ironic memorial to everything that was about to crumble. But as he walked, a persistent, almost bothersome thought returned, the cleaning lady's voice. "Marjorie, you were carrying too much by yourself." He didn't know why it affected him so much. Perhaps because no one ever offered him anything that didn't come with a price. On the other side of town, in a simple residential neighborhood in the Bronx, Marjorie Hale began her day. The small old house creaked in the cold autumn wind. The walls, though worn, were welcoming. Old photographs decorated the living room. Her and her late husband, her and her son, her as a young woman working as a cook in a small family restaurant. The reality was harsh, but she faced each morning with quiet resignation. He had worked in the building for over 17 years. He had seen generations of executives come and go. He had learned to recognize, just by their walk, who was about to explode, who was lying to themselves, and who carried heavier burdens than they let on. She was a silent observer, invisible to the corporate world rushing through the revolving doors. That morning, while she was putting on her uniform, her son called. "Mom, are you sure you want to keep working?" he asked, worried. "You should rest. After your knee injury, you don't need to be on your feet all day." "And what am I supposed to do?" Marjorie replied, smiling slightly. "Sit around waiting for time to pass? I like to work. At least, there I see people. Here it's just me and these walls. I'm just worried." "I know, darling," she interrupted, "and thank you. But I'm fine, really." Despite her light-hearted tone, she avoided talking about her operated knee, the persistent pain, the job that didn't pay enough, or how much she missed her husband who had left too soon. Everyone carries something on their own, she thought, but some carry more than they should. Back at Caldwell Horizons, Ethan gathered documents in his glass-walled office. The panoramic view of Manhattan had once filled him with pride. Now it seemed to mock his impending downfall. But as he reviewed reports, an inconsistency caught his eye. The losses were substantial, yes, but some transfers didn't seem to be solely Morris's work. There were signatures, approvals, and records he didn't recognize. Someone on the inside had manipulated the documents. He called Brittany. "Who had access to the internal audit spreadsheets over the last 3 months?" he asked, more curtly than he intended. She frowned. "Just the finance director. And, of course, Mr. Morris." Ethan felt a growing unease. The finance director, Janice Crowell, was a brilliant woman, a veteran of the company, respected by everyone, including him. But there was something strange about her recent behavior. Cancelled meetings, evasive answers, mood swings. It didn't make sense to accuse her, not yet. But the mystery deepened. At lunchtime, Ethan went down to the ground floor. The lobby was crowded but silent, as if employees were whispering rumors instead of conversing. And there, at the far end, near the service elevator, he saw her, Marjorie. She was cleaning the steel handrail with slow, careful movements. He hesitated. It was ridiculous. He knew it. A multi-millionaire executive going after a cleaning lady to what? To thank her, to talk, to understand why such a simple phrase had affected him so much. But he came closer. "Excuse me," he said, his voice lower than usual. She stared at him, surprised, then offered a gentle but discreet smile. "Sir Caldwell, isn't it?" He nodded. "Yesterday," Ethan began, but he didn't know how to continue. "Did I say something I shouldn't have?" Marjorie asked sincerely. "On the contrary," he replied. "You said exactly what I needed to hear." She simply smiled, without pride or surprise, like someone who understood that small gestures had big effects, even when no one noticed. At that moment, something changed subtly, but profoundly. It wasn't friendship, not yet. It was curiosity, an unlikely connection between two completely different worlds. And while Manhattan continued its cold rhythm, both Ethan and Marjorie carried something new that day, the seed of an impact that neither of them imagined where it would end. The hours following the brief conversation with Marjorie were a whirlwind of decisions, pressures, and discoveries that pushed Ethan deeper and deeper into the chaos. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but since the morning the phone calls had become insistent, almost aggressive. Investors wanted guarantees. Banks demanded explanations. Employees feared losing their jobs. Caldwell Horizons seemed like a gigantic ship about to sink, and everyone wanted to grab onto something to avoid drowning with it. Ethan walked through the 13th floor, where the internal audit team was located, observing the environment with a sharp eye. People gestured around tables overflowing with documents, charts, and spreadsheets. The computer screens displayed data that once conveyed security. Now they were just numbers that laid bare the size of the financial hole. "Mr. Caldwell," a voice called from behind him. It was Anthony Reyes, head of auditing, firm, meticulous, and known for not being intimidated, even by the most powerful shareholders. Ethan had always trusted him, perhaps more than anyone else in the company. "We have something," Anthony said, lowering his voice. "And it's not good." He led him to a private room. On the table were 3 folders, and the laptop opened to a spreadsheet that Ethan had never seen before. "These signatures here," Anthony pointed out, "look like yours, but they're not. We analyzed the pressure of the writing, the slant. It doesn't match. Someone reproduced your signature using a digital template, probably from old documents." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "How much are we talking about? Between $280 and $310 million in direct or indirect transactions carried out without your authorization." The information hit like a punch to the gut. The numbers were huge, even for a billion-dollar company. But what weighed most heavily wasn't just the embezzlement, it was the feeling that they were using their name as a shield. "And Richard Morris?" Ethan asked. "He validated some of the fake approvals." And Anthony took a deep breath. There are indications that someone within the finance department facilitated the access. Janice. The name emerged like a ghost. There was no proof yet, but the shadow was there. "I need this investigation to continue," Ethan said, discreetly. "We're already in it, but—" Anthony hesitated. "I suggest you prepare a defense. This could go far beyond financial losses." Ethan's heart tightened. He knew. Corporate fraud, money laundering, accounting manipulation, serious crimes. Even as a victim, he would be dragged along, and the Caldwell name, so protected for generations, could be tarnished forever. At noon, he met his sister, Claire Caldwell, at the building's restaurant. Claire was a brilliant, respected criminal defense attorney, and one of the few people whose opinion he truly valued. Unlike Ethan, she had never been interested in business. She wanted freedom to work with people, to pursue justice in a practical way, even if it meant confronting her own family at times. "Ethan, this is very serious," she said, resting her elbows on the table. "The FBI wants full access to the accounts. If they find any inconsistencies linked to your name—" "It wasn't me," Ethan interrupted firmly. "I know that, but evidence matters more than intentions. And right now, almost everything points to you. Signatures, digital approvals, official records." He ran a hand over his face, exhausted. "Claire, someone set this up, and I need to find out who before it's too late." "The problem," she replied, "is that time is already against you." The waiter brought coffee for both of them, but neither touched the cups. "What's your strategy for the board meeting?" she asked. Ethan remained silent for a few seconds. "Be transparent, show that I'm investigating, and ask for time." Claire let out a short, bitter laugh. "The board doesn't like time. The board likes results, and now they want someone to blame. That culprit could be you, or someone you don't want to believe would do this." Janice's name pulsed in his mind again. He shook his head. "I never thought she could—" "You have been thinking about it," Claire interrupted bluntly. "You've been thinking about it ever since Anthony spoke. And that hesitation could cost you dearly." Ethan glanced toward the restaurant window. Outside, the grey sky held the same metallic hue as the building. It was as if the entire city was watching its downfall. Meanwhile, in the maintenance department, Marjorie pushed her cart slowly down the aisles. She had no idea about financial details, corporate fraud, or federal investigations, but she sensed the atmosphere, tense glances, constant whispers, doors closing as she approached. It was the kind of atmosphere that preceded something big or devastating. As she walked down the hallway leading to the private elevator, she saw Ethan again. He was talking to Brittany and a lawyer from the company. He seemed tired, even more so than the day before, but there was something different in his expression, a stubborn determination. She recognized that look. It was the look of someone who is losing everything, but refuses to fall without a fight. When Ethan noticed her presence, he gave a small nod. Nothing significant, but for someone like her, used to being invisible, it carried weight. The meeting with the board was brutal. 8 men and 3 women sat around an oval table of dark wood, observing Ethan as if he were a defendant. Sharp questions, blatant suspicions, direct pressure. "Caldwell, was it you who approved the September transactions? Why would Morris have access to your digital signature? Can you guarantee that there was no negligence? Why did the finance director request an advance on her vacation pay 2 weeks before the scandal broke? What is your explanation for all of this?" Ethan responded calmly, more calmly than he felt. He laid out the facts, explained the inconsistencies, and presented the suspicions under investigation. But the faces on the other side of the table remained rigid. "Let's be direct," the chairman of the board finally said. "Until everything is clarified, we want to temporarily remove him from the executive management." Those words hit Ethan like ice. The room seemed to shrink, removed from the empire itself, from the company itself. and all in the name of a lie constructed by someone who was still in the shadows. When he left the room, he felt the world spin for a moment. He leaned against the cold wall of the hallway. An emptiness enveloped him, as if all the weight accumulated in the last few days had finally collapsed. And then suddenly he heard a voice behind him, gentle, family-friendly. "Sometimes when everything is taken from us, it's to make room for us to discover who we really are." He turned around. Marjorie was there, unaware of what had happened, unable to comprehend the magnitude of the pain he carried, but somehow she was saying exactly what he needed to know, and at that moment, without realizing it, the conflict ceased to be merely financial. It became personal, deep. It's irreversible. The afternoon wore on over New York with a cold wind that cut through the streets like blades. Inside Caldwell Horizons, however, the cold came from elsewhere. From the tense silence that had settled in after news of Ethan's departure spread through the corridors. Some employees whispered, others pretended not to know anything, but everyone was watching. Ethan walked through the building with measured steps, as if trying to preserve what little dignity he had left. His own office now seemed strange, too personal, too exposed. Every photograph, every award, every framed contract seemed to mock him. But there was no time for lamenting. Questions were being asked from all sides. There were moves happening beyond his control. And there was a growing sense that he wasn't just dealing with a fraud, but with a complex, meticulously orchestrated scheme. While she was packing boxes with her personal belongings, Brittany entered silently. "Ethan," she began hesitantly. "There was one more thing." He looked up. The finance director, Janice, got in touch. Ethan's chest tightened immediately. "What did she say?" "Nothing," Brittany replied, lowering her voice. "She just quit, effective immediately, and she didn't come back to work today." Ethan slammed the box shut more forcefully than he intended. "She's running away." "I think so," Brittany murmured. It was more than that, though. It was the final thread of a web that was beginning to unravel, a web where he wasn't the predator, but rather the prey. That same day, while Ethan was dealing with his personal downfall, a subplot was unfolding outside the corporate radar. In a working-class neighborhood in the Bronx, Marjorie Hale entered her home with a bag of simple groceries, bread, milk, vegetables, and a small, inexpensive cake she had bought to brighten up the end of the afternoon. His son, Darren, was sitting on the sofa, his head down, his shoulders hunched. The medicine tray was on the table, but only 2 pills had been taken since morning. "Darren, did you take everything correctly?" she asked, worried. He shook his head. "Mom, it's no use." She sat down next to him, holding his hand. "Darren, you're recovering. The doctor said that post-accident depression is normal. You just need time." He interrupted her. "Time doesn't pay the bills, Mom." She looked at the floor. This was the truth she never spoke aloud. The accident that had robbed Darren of his ability to work without constant pain had changed everything in the house. They lived on her modest salary and small benefits. It was a tightrope walk. Any unforeseen event, any emergency, could shatter what little they had. "I'm trying, son," she said, stroking his hand. "Every day I try." Darren stared at her sadly. "You work until you feel pain. And why? Because nobody looks at you in that building. Nobody notices. Nobody cares." She smiled gently. "Sometimes to make a difference in someone's life, you don't need to be seen. You just need to be there." He didn't answer. But that moment revealed a new layer of Marjorie's life, an enormous responsibility, a silent burden she carried without ever complaining. Back in downtown Manhattan, Ethan left the building through the side door, as if trying to avoid stares. The sidewalk was busy, taxis honked, people hurried past, indifferent to anyone else's drama, and then, almost instinctively, he decided to walk. Just walk, aimlessly, without a defined direction. The streets led him to Bryant Park, where he sat on a bench watching the passers-by. There, amidst the urban bustle, something caught his eye. A small food distribution tent for the homeless. Volunteers were serving hot soup, coffee, and blankets. And, to his surprise, among the volunteers was Claire, his sister. He approached slowly. "I thought you had a lot of cases to deal with today," he said. "Yes. But sometimes I need to get out of them before they swallow me whole," she replied without irony. "You should try that too." He took a deep breath. "The council removed me from my position." She stopped what she was doing and looked at her brother. "And now?" "Now. I need to find proof. I need to understand who is behind this." Claire crossed her arms. "You're going to need more trustworthy people. You can't do this alone, Ethan. Not this time." He looked away. "I no longer know who to trust." "Trust those who have nothing to gain from you," she replied. "Those are usually the most loyal." The phrase kept echoing in Ethan's mind. Those who have nothing to gain, like Marjorie. The next day, he returned to the building, not as CEO, but as a visitor authorized by the board. And upon arriving in the lobby, he found Marjorie cleaning the glass doors. She smiled when she saw him. "It seems like it's a difficult day again." "It is," Ethan admitted. "And maybe I need a favor." She frowned. "From me?" Ethan hesitated. It was absurd, improbable. But at that moment he realized something he had never seen before, that sometimes ordinary people see things that the powerful ignore. "You've worked here for many years," he said. "You observe everything, people, movements, conversations, changes in behavior." She stared at him intently. "What exactly do you want to know?" Ethan took a deep breath. "I want to know who, inside this building, has changed their behavior in the last few weeks. Who seemed nervous, who arrived too early or left too late, who avoided crossing paths with me, anything." She didn't ask why. He simply nodded. And in that simple answer, subplot and main plot intertwined, creating new layers, new tensions, and opening doors that Ethan never imagined he would need to cross. The clock read 10:47 p.m. when the service elevator at Caldwell Horizons stopped on the 32nd floor. Almost the entire building was empty, except for 3 people who should never have been there at the same time: Ethan, Claire, and Marjorie. The trio walked cautiously down the narrow, silent corridor. The automatic lights flickered on as they moved forward, creating shadows that were projected onto the white walls. Ethan kept his breathing under control, but his heart was racing. That night was the culmination of weeks of silent investigation, conducted by him, his lawyer sister, and, surprisingly, the only person who truly saw everything in that building, Marjorie. In recent days, she had noticed patterns, movements, rituals, people who acted as if they had something to hide, and everything pointed to the same place, the boardroom where Janice, the missing CFO, had worked for years. "The hallway camera has been off since 7 p.m., Claire whispered. "It's like someone was already expecting someone to come." Marjorie pressed her mop against her chest, as if it were a lucky charm. "Sometimes the problem isn't what you see," she said, "but what nobody wants to see." Upon entering the room, Ethan gripped the cold doorknob. For a moment he hesitated. This was no longer his company, and yet it was the only life he knew. "Ready?" Claire asked. Ethan nodded. He opened the door. The room was different. There were no papers on the table, no folders, boxes, or files. It was as if someone had cleaned everything up in a hurry or out of fear. But Marjorie walked to one of the side walls. It was a dark wooden wall, seemingly simple, but she had noticed a strange detail. Tiny scratches at the base, as if someone had opened it frequently. "Here," she said. With steady hands, he pressed down on one of the panels. Little by little, a section slid to the side. Behind it, there was a cold, metallic, hidden compartment. Inside it, a black box. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Claire carefully opened the box and found dozens of flash drives, printed contracts, accounting records, and reports signed by Janice, but also by someone else. A name that made Ethan's blood boil. Michael Roth, president of the council. It was a coup orchestrated from within. It wasn't just a scam, it was a power grab. Claire flipped through the documents quickly. Ethan, this is huge. They embezzled funds for months, transferred them to shell companies, manipulated reports, and they used your electronic signature on practically everything. They wanted me to fall, Ethan murmured, feeling his anger rising. I was the perfect scapegoat. Marjorie looked at the papers sadly. And I thought I'd seen all the bad people in this world, she said. But this is something else entirely. That's when they heard footsteps. And these were not ordinary steps. They were determined. Targeted, calculated. Claire quickly turned off the light. 3 silhouettes appeared in the hallway. Ethan's heart raced. It was too late to run away. They were trapped. The door to the room burst open with a violent crack. Michael Roth entered, followed by 2 bodyguards. I figured you'd try to do something stupid, Ethan, he said coldly, but you really exceeded my expectations. You even brought an audience. Ethan stepped forward. You destroyed the company. You manipulated the numbers. You ruined careers, and you tried to ruin mine. Michael smiled. That's how business is. The future belongs to those who have the courage to do what is necessary. Claire stood beside her brother. You're going to pay for this. Every document, every forged signature, every transfer. It's all here. Michael laughed. Really? And you think anyone will believe you? I control the council. I control the narrative. You have nothing. It was then that a sound interrupted the moment. A beep. Simple. Almost discreet, but that made Michael's face turn pale. Marjorie picked up her cell phone. Actually, we do, she said calmly. I recorded everything, from the moment you opened the door. Silence. Deep. Sharp. The security guards hesitated. Ethan stared Michael in the eyes. Now the story has changed. A commotion ensued. Claire immediately called the district attorney's office. The security guards retreated, fearing involvement. Michael tried to argue, then to threaten, then to despair, all in vain. When the police arrived minutes later, he already knew. The game was lost. But the most unexpected moment occurred when Michael, as he was being handcuffed, looked at Marjorie with pure hatred. You're just a cleaning lady, he shouted. You had no right to interfere. Marjorie responded with a serenity that disarmed even the police officers. The problem is that powerful people always think that nobody is watching. But I was, and it was there all the time. When it was all over, Ethan sat in the same chair where he had signed documents so many times, whether crucial or not. Now, however, he felt something very different. Humility. He turned to Marjorie. You saved my professional life, my reputation, everything. I don't know how to thank you. She smiled shyly. Sometimes we just do what's right. That wasn't all. He knew. She had done more than was right. He had done the impossible. And because of that, nothing in his life would be the same. The news of Michael Roth's arrest exploded in the media like wildfire, and no one could control it. Newspapers, websites, TV channels, everyone wanted to know how such a deep financial scandal had been uncovered by an investigation conducted not by experts, but by 3 unlikely people. A former CEO who was ousted, a criminal defense lawyer, and a cleaning lady. However, contrary to what many might imagine, this was not the real turning point. The upheaval, the real, the brutal, the transformative one, was only just beginning. 3 days later, Ethan was summoned by the board to an emergency meeting. It was early, shortly after 7 a.m., and the Manhattan sky still displayed the bluish hues of dawn. The atmosphere was solemn, almost funereal. As he entered the meeting room, the council members stared at him with tense expressions. Some were embarrassed, others were angry, Still others were frightened, as if they had watched their castle crumble and now didn't know where to step. The acting chair of the board, Ms. Davenport, was direct. "Ethan, we found new documents at Michael Roth's house. Some of them involve you." Ethan felt his stomach drop. "What do you mean, involving me?" The woman slid a folder across the table. He opened it, and it froze. There, before his eyes, was something he would never have imagined: a special power of attorney, signed in your own handwriting. But he never signed it. The power of attorney authorized Michael to move company funds in emergency situations, without the need for prior approval from the CEO. That was all Michael needed to legitimize months of fraud, and it was signed as if it were by Ethan. His eyes widened. "That's false! Someone forged my signature." "We know," Davenport replied. "A preliminary investigation has already confirmed that." Ethan breathed a sigh of relief for a moment. But then Rachel, another counselor, added, "But there's another problem, a bigger one." She pushed 2 more documents through her, and when Ethan read them, he felt the blood drain from his face. "That's impossible," he murmured. The documents described a personal investment made in your name in a shell company created by Michael. According to official records, Ethan allegedly profited hundreds of thousands of dollars from the fraud. It was clear that he had been used as a central piece of the scheme. But there was something even stranger. "Where did you find this?" Ethan asked. Davenport crossed his hands on the table. "At Janice's house, along with a letter, addressed to you." She took an envelope out of the folder and slid it over to him. Ethan's heart raced. "Open it," she said. He obeyed. Inside was a hastily written letter. The handwriting was shaky, trembling, as if it had been done in a rush or under great emotional stress. "Ethan, they're going to destroy you. I tried to leave. I tried to stop him, but he found out. Michael forced me to fake everything. I had no choice. There are things you haven't seen yet, things he hid. Don't trust anyone on the council, except the cleaning lady. She saw everything. She knows the schedules, the access logs. What happened on the internal servers? She overheard conversations none of us noticed. She can save you. Sorry." Janice Ethan reread the last sentence 3 times. The cleaning lady. Janice knew. He slowly raised his head, facing the council members. "I want the investigation to be expanded, not just to Michael, but to all of you. Everything will be verified. Every decision, every signature, every transfer." Some council members protested, others looked away. But the turnaround was only just beginning. Meanwhile, in the Bronx, Marjorie was having a simple coffee with her son Darren. The TV on the small table showed the Caldwell Horizons corporate scandal. And then, for the first time, Darren paid attention. "Mom, it's from that place where you work." "Yes," she replied, matter-of-factly. "Did you discover all of this?" She gave a slight smile. "I only helped a little." But Darren didn't take his eyes off the TV. Something inside him changed at that moment. A new kind of respect, a new hope, a quiet pride that he had never shown before. Marjorie noticed, and her eyes welled up with tears. Hours later, she was called to the council's office. Something unheard of for a cleaning lady. She arrived timidly, clutching her worn-out bag, and there she found Ethan. Neat, composed, but with an expression she had never seen on him before. Genuine humility. "Marjorie, I need you to see something," he said, handing her Janice's letter. She read slowly, feeling the weight of each word. When he finished, he looked up. "Your advice is the problem, Mr. Ethan, not just the president's." He swallowed hard. "I know." She took a deep breath, hesitating for a moment. Then he said, "I overheard a conversation, weeks before all this blew up. A conversation that no one should have heard," and he began to recount the events, every detail, each sentence, every name involved. Ethan turned pale. The upheaval was taking on new dimensions. The scheme wasn't just Michael's, it was bigger, much bigger. It involved two influential advisors, it involved the legal director, and it involved an external auditor hired to manipulate reports. There were more guilty parties, much more, and only one person had seen everything, the cleaning lady that nobody noticed. The big twist wasn't just that Ethan now had evidence against the conspiracy. It wasn't just that the entire company was about to change. It wasn't just that Marjorie had become the central piece of the truth. The real twist was this. The most invisible person in the building was, in fact, the only one who could see everything. And thanks to her, and on her, the truth would finally come to light. The revelations brought by Marjorie were more than just a loose end. They were the tip of a cable buried under years of corruption, collusion, and corporate silence. For the first time since his fall, Ethan felt something he hadn't recognized in a long time: purpose. In the following days, while new investigations were conducted, he decided to act not only as a wronged man, trying to clear his name, but as someone willing to rebuild everything that had failed, including himself. The morning after Marjorie's testimony, Ethan arrived at the firm earlier than everyone else. He walked through the nearly empty hallways, feeling the distant echo of footsteps, memories, and decisions that had led him there. But that morning, something was different. He stopped in front of the elevator, the same one where he had cried months before, believing he had lost everything. He opened the automatic door with a special visitor employee card and went inside. The mirror reflected a man very different from the one who had first entered. Not a powerful CEO, not a broken man, but someone is rebuilding. The door opened on the 43rd floor, where a team of government investigators was already setting up camp. Agents were analyzing stacks of documents, seized computers, and boxes of accounting records. Agent Laura Whitaker, who was in charge of the operation, greeted Ethan. "We received the remaining information that the cleaning lady provided. It confirms that the scheme had multiple leaders. In part, you were just a convenient shield." Ethan nodded. "I want to help. You'll have to deal with pressure, lengthy testimonies, and potential retaliation," Whitaker warned. "I've been through worse," he replied. "I'm ready." And for the first time, I was telling the truth. Meanwhile, Marjorie lived her own journey of growth, one she never imagined could happen. After giving her testimony, Ethan asked the HR department to guarantee complete protection for her and her family. This included a new bus route, a new departure time, an updated ID badge, and even discreet surveillance during the first few weeks. Marjorie, however, rejected excessive privileges. "I don't want a life different from the one I've always had. I just want to continue working in peace." Ethan smiled. "You deserve so much more than peace, Marjorie." She laughed shyly. "Peace is already more than I had." But internal changes began to flourish. In the cafeteria, employees who had previously ignored her were now greeting her. Some people asked for opinions, others asked if she was okay, some even apologized for never having realized its importance, and she was getting used to the idea that being seen wasn't wrong. While both were growing, each in their own way, the company was experiencing an earthquake. 3 council members were removed from their positions. The legal director resigned after a plea bargain. External auditors have been suspended. And the press followed every detail as if it were a police mini-series. Caldwell Horizons was crumbling, but paradoxically, Ethan was rising. In one of the tensest meetings since the start of the investigations, Ethan was called back to the building. He didn't know if it would be to testify, to receive updates, or to face more attacks. Upon entering the main room, he found something unexpected. Marjorie was there, sitting in the corner of the room, with a notepad. With a simple posture but a firm expression, Interim President Davenport explained, "We thought it would be fair to invite her. After all, without her, none of this would have come to light." Marjorie smiled discreetly, almost uncomfortable with so much attention. The meeting began, and for hours mind maps, charts, and timelines were drawn up. Ethan observed the complexity of the conspiracy and felt, with a mixture of indignation and responsibility, the weight of having trusted the culprit so much. At a certain point, the discussion heated up. One of the remaining council members stood up angrily. "This is absurd. It's impossible that all of this could have happened without the CEO knowing." Marjorie cleared her throat gently. Everyone looked at her. She said, with the calm of someone who is simply speaking the truth, "The problem is that you see the building from top to bottom, but I see it from bottom to top, and you forget what happens below." Total silence. The sentence fell across the room like a precise blade. The advisor sat down again, without replying. Ethan turned to her with a look that mixed gratitude, admiration, and something new, a clarity that only arises when you recognize the value of someone who has always been there. In the following days, Ethan worked tirelessly to help piece together the timeline of the scheme. Each of his actions reflected more than duty. It reflected transformation. He started listening more, to judge less, observing those who were previously unaware, participating in conversations with ordinary employees, something he had never done as CEO. Marjorie, on the other hand, grew up in a quieter but equally powerful way. Darren began to study it in a different way. He started asking about her day. He started talking about school. He began to show concern. It was the first time in months that he seemed present. Marjorie felt that, for the first time in a long time, her life had a voice. Ethan and Marjorie started talking more, sometimes in the elevator, sometimes at the World Cup, sometimes in the quiet hallways of the building when she started or finished her shift. They weren't long conversations, they weren't emotional, but they were sincere. "You used to be much stronger than me," Ethan confessed one night. "The Force doesn't change the world, Mr. Ethan. What changes it is what we do with it," Marjorie replied. Ethan realized that this woman was rebuilding him, not as a mentor, not like a close friend, but like someone who reminded him every day of what he had forgotten, the value of simple truth. Their overcoming of challenges didn't come from speeches, it came from stocks, small, constants, consistent. Both were evolving. One to go up, the other one is relearning how to get down to the ground. The final moment of this growth arrived on a grey afternoon. Agent Whitaker entered the room with a report in hand. "We're finished," she said. "All the pieces are in place. And now, we need to decide who will take the lead on the company during the rebuilding process." She looked at Ethan. She looked at Marjorie. Then she smiled in a way that no one expected. The twist of fate was poised to become destiny. The final investigation report caused a seismic shock within Caldwell Horizons. Names once celebrated in the corporate world now appeared in headlines, accompanied by words like fraud, conspiracy, denunciation, and money laundering. The entire building seemed to breathe tension, silent elevators, short meetings, whispers in the hallways, glances that avoided direct contact. But as the chaos grew, one question remained in the air. Who would lead the company's reconstruction? The answer would come soon, and it would be unexpected. Ethan spent the next 4 weeks immersed in reports, government meetings, and tense encounters with shareholders. He slept little, ate poorly, and lived under the constant shadow of cameras, lawyers, and agents. But there was a fundamental difference between this Ethan and the man who months before had cried in the elevator. Now he had clarity. "I knew what I needed to do. He knew who he needed to protect. I knew there wouldn't be a second chance. And most importantly, he knew he was no longer alone." Marjorie was also experiencing her own whirlwind. She had become a key player in the investigation and was called to meetings almost weekly. At first, her steps were hesitant, but over time, she began to walk with more firmness. Her voice, once trembling, took on a subtle tone of confidence, not arrogance, but an awareness of her own worth. In the building, employees commented on her courage. Some still observed her with bewilderment, not understanding how a cleaning lady had become so fundamental in a corporate war. Others, more observant, saw in her something that was lacking on practically every floor: unwavering integrity. But Marjorie wasn't fooled by praise. She knew the corporate world was a place where respect was fleeting. She simply did what she had always done: the right thing. Chaos reached its peak when Agent Whitaker summoned everyone involved to an extraordinary meeting. The room was packed: lawyers, remaining board members, federal auditors, shareholder representatives, and a crisis communications team. Ethan and Marjorie sat side by side, something that months before would have seemed absurd. Whitaker opened the meeting with a phrase that made the atmosphere heavier. "We have a critical decision to make. The company needs immediate leadership. But we're not just talking about position, we're talking about moral rebuilding." The acting president of the council cleared her throat. After a thorough analysis, only 2 possible candidates remained. 2 names that showed no involvement, conflict of interest, or ethical breach. 2 names that, in different ways, upheld the company's integrity as it crumbled. A murmur echoed through the room. Ethan knew he would be called. But something unexpected happened. The 2 names chosen are Ethan Caldwell and Marjorie Thompson. The silence was absolute. Ethan slowly turned his face towards her. Marjorie's eyes widened in shock. "Me?" she whispered, almost inaudibly. Whitaker confirmed. Her actions, her attention to detail, her testimony, and her courage place her among the most trustworthy people in this entire building. Marjorie shook her head. "But I only cleaned the floor," the interim president responded firmly. "Exactly. You saw what no one else saw, because you're the only one here who never tried to climb up by stepping on someone." Some council members protested, claiming it was absurd. The older members were indignant. Others tried to suggest alternative paths. The discussion became heated, but with each sentence, Marjorie's presence remained solid, even if her body trembled inside. Ethan finally stood up. "If you want the company to recover, then you need to understand something. Corruption happened because people like you believed you were above others. We need someone who sees everything without wanting anything in return. We need someone who represents the values you destroyed. We need her." He pointed at Marjorie while everyone else fell silent. She blushed, lowering her gaze. She didn't want to be the center of attention. She never had. And yet, there she was, being seen once again. In the days that followed, the tension intensified. The shareholders needed to approve an unprecedented decision. The lawyers feared repercussions. The media speculated about a possible dual provisional leadership. Meanwhile, Ethan and Marjorie began working together on a rebuilding plan based on complete transparency. With each page, with each revision, it became clearer that, although they came from different worlds, they shared something crucial: the desire to transform the company's culture. "Why are you doing this?" Marjorie asked one night while reviewing documents beside him. "Because I got lost," Ethan replied. "And you found me." She didn't answer, but her smile said it all. When voting day finally arrived, the building seemed to be suspended in mid-air. Representatives from investment funds, minority shareholders, lawyers, and government officials occupied every seat in the main auditorium. The decision would be broadcast live to all departments at Caldwell Horizons. Thousands of employees watched from the cafeteria, the reception area, and the offices. And among them, many knew the company would never be the same after that moment. The screen displayed the names of the 2 candidates. Ethan walked up to the stage. Marjorie was called in immediately afterwards. As she climbed the steps, their eyes met. Some were astonished, others worthy of respect, others were still filled with pure disbelief. But no one dared to say anything. Voting has begun. Outside on the streets of Manhattan, the sky was darkening. The wind heralded change, and the city, with its constant rush, was about to witness something unprecedented. In the final second of the count, Agent Whitaker received the result in hand. She looked at Ethan. She looked at Marjorie, and he took a deep breath before announcing. The entire auditorium held its breath as Agent Whitaker held up the envelope containing the voting results. The silence was so profound that the distant ticking of a digital clock could be heard. Ethan stood motionless. Marjorie, her hands clasped together, tried to control the trembling of her fingers. After analyzing the votes of the shareholders and legal representatives, Whitaker began slowly. "We have a result." She opened the envelope with surgical calm, observed the paper for 3 long seconds, and then announced, "The new interim leadership model at Caldwell Horizons will be a dual leadership, comprised of Ethan Caldwell and Marjorie Thompson." The auditorium erupted, not in applause but in mixed reactions. Some stood up in indignation, others seemed too shocked to react. A small but sincere group applauded loudly, seeing in that result a rebirth. Marjorie put her hand to her mouth in disbelief. Ethan simply closed his eyes and exhaled, as if finally reaching dry land after months of swimming against a violent tide. Whitaker continued. "The decision was unanimous among the Federal Committee and obtained a majority among the representative shareholders. From today, both will lead the company under the direct supervision of the authorities, rebuilding the ethical and structural pillars of the organization." The world has always loved improbable stories, but none as improbable as this one. The following days were a perfect storm. Interviews, news reports, conferences, lawyers, crisis consultants. The image of the cleaning lady who had become co-leader of a mega corporation went viral in an overwhelming way. From cleaning to leadership, the woman who exposed an empire. The invisible employee who saw everything. Marjorie had become a symbol even before she understood what was happening. But along with the fame came the attacks. On social media, harsh criticism emerged. They called her unprepared, like a clown, a media coup. Some of the older employees were whispering in the hallways, "This is a joke, a cleaning lady in charge of us?" Ethan overheard one of these comments as he walked by. He stopped in front of the group and said, "If she's a joke, then you are the legacy of a failure she helped fix. Think about that." They fell silent. Marjorie, however, felt the weight of it all. With every decision she made, every document she signed, she felt the echo of her old life. The fear of making mistakes, of being exposed, of not being up to the task. But by her side was Ethan, always willing to support, teach, and often learn from her. Internal tensions reached a critical point when an extraordinary meeting with international investors was scheduled. It would be the first public appearance of the dual leadership, and the event would be broadcast live throughout the country. It was the decisive moment. Or they proved they could lead the company, or all the effort would crumble in front of the cameras. On the day of the event, Marjorie wore a simple navy blue blazer, borrowed from her daughter. Her shoes were modest, but polished. She looked in the mirror and still saw the cleaning lady, but now there was something different. Her eyes were firm. Ethan knocked on the door. "Ready?" She swallowed hard. "I don't know. What if I freeze up? What if I say something wrong? People expect me to be perfect." "Then it's easy," he said, "because nothing that comes from you is false. All you have to do is be true." She smiled slightly. "And you? Are you nervous?" Ethan laughed, but there was truth in his eyes. Terribly. The auditorium was packed. Cameras, reporters, flashes. The stage glowed under intense white lights. When Ethan and Marjorie entered, silence spread like a wave. Ethan began the presentation by explaining past mistakes and the decisive steps toward rebuilding the company. His tone was firm, direct, and charismatic. He was, after all, a Caldwell, someone trained to speak to the world. Then it was Marjorie's turn. She walked to the podium. She could feel her heart pounding in her neck. The eyes of the audience were beacons pointed at her soul, but when she held the microphone, something surprising happened. She remembered a night years ago when she was sweeping the floor of that same building and dreamed of being seen. And it began. My name is Marjorie Thompson, and for 17 years I worked in the hallways of this invisible company. A sigh escaped the auditorium. I know every corner of this building. The smell of burnt coffee in the 10th floor meeting room, the sound the elevator makes when it's about to stop, the papers left on desks by people who thought they'd never be questioned. She paused. I've seen the company grow. I've seen the company rot, and I've seen that no one was doing anything to stop it. A murmur ran through the audience. I don't have a Harvard degree. I don't have an MBA. I don't have a powerful last name, but I have something that's been lost inside me. Responsibility for what I see and what I do. And that's what brought us here today. Silence. But not a judgmental silence. It was a silence of impact. She continued, From today onward, I promise that nothing will be swept under the rug, neither dirt nor truths. The auditorium erupted in applause. Ethan smiled in a way that few people have ever seen in their lives, proudly. When they left the stage, Agent Whitaker met them in the hallway. It was powerful, genuine, exactly what we needed. But then she added something that made them both frown. But it's not over yet. We found something, and you need to see it. Now. Ethan and Marjorie exchanged glances. They found what? He asked. Whitaker took a deep breath. A recording. One that changes everything we thought we knew about this whole story. They both froze. Come on. This can't wait. They followed her down the hallway. The fluorescent lights reflected off the floor, creating long reflections that seemed to drag the future behind them. The climax was far from over. The most surprising revelation was yet to come. The room where Officer Whitaker led them was small, cold, and lit only by a circular lamp attached to the ceiling. There was a metal table, 3 chairs, and a switched-off monitor. The kind of room used to present evidence that changes the course of everything. Whitaker carefully closed the door and locked it. Before I show you what we found, she said, I need you to know that this wasn't in the official files. It was found by chance during the final scan on a server that had been deleted years ago. Ethan felt his stomach clench. What's in that recording? He asked. Whitaker looked at him with something between regret and urgency. A truth you didn't know, but that completely changes how this story began. She turned on the monitor. The screen flickered. An old Caldwell Horizons logo has surfaced, one that hasn't been used for almost a decade. The video has started. The image showed a meeting room, leather chairs, a polished table, 3 men dressed in expensive suits. One was the former finance director, the other the head of operations, but the third... Marjorie put her hand to her chest. Ethan stopped breathing. The third was Ethan's father. That's not possible, Ethan murmured. The video was 7 years old. Ethan's father was alive, and he looked tired, exhausted, very different from the powerful man Ethan always remembered. The executives were speaking quietly, but the audio was clear. Leonard, said the finance director, we have to decide today. If you don't participate, the scheme won't work. Ethan's father shook his head. I'm not going to participate in this. I'm not going to ruin the company I built just to enrich a handful of bloodsuckers. The operations chief retorted, then you will be removed from the council. Simple as that. I'd rather lose my chair, Leonard replied, than lose my character. There was a pause. Then the finance director said something that sent shivers down the spine of the room. Okay, Leonard, if you don't want to cooperate, we'll do it our way. The video ended there. The screen went black. The silence was deafening. Ethan stood motionless, his jaw clenched, his eyes moist. He had always believed his father had died without knowing about the corruption. He had always imagined that, if he were alive, he would have prevented all the scandals. But now, the truth was different. He tried to stop it, Ethan whispered. My father tried to stop all of this, all by himself. Whitaker nodded, but after that video, he was removed from his position. Soon after, he began experiencing health problems. Now we know why. He was under enormous pressure, isolated and threatened. Marjorie looked at Ethan carefully. They destroyed what your father built, and they tried to destroy you too." Ethan sat down, taking a deep breath. On the one hand, the revelation was devastating. On the other hand, it brought something he hadn't felt in years: peace. "He wasn't an accomplice," Ethan murmured. "He was a victim." Whitaker turned off the monitor. "Now you understand why this recording is so important. It proves that the corruption started before you took office. You didn't inherit his mistakes. You inherited the fight he tried to wage alone." Ethan discreetly wiped away a tear. "I wish he could have seen all this," she said. "That he could see that someone finally had the courage to finish what he started." Whitaker smiled slightly. "He saw, not while you were alive, but he saw what you've become." Marjorie placed her hand on Ethan's arm in a simple and sincere gesture. "You are no longer fighting alone." Just as he shouldn't have been. Ethan looked at her. The elevator, the conversation, everything she had done, every detail she had noticed, every truth that she insisted on not ignoring. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking, "for everything." Marjorie smiled. "I only did what was right. Your father would have been proud of that too." In the following days, the recording was handed over to the authorities and attached to the final dossier of the investigation. The media exploded with the news. Leonard Caldwell's name was cleared, his image restored, his story finally told, and Caldwell Horizons was reborn. Not as the untouchable empire it once was, but as the company that decided to confront its ghosts. Ethan and Marjorie continued to lead side by side, he with his vision, she with her integrity, both guided by the legacy of a man who tried to prevent collapse, and by the courage of a woman who started by sweeping the floor, but ended up sweeping up the dirt of an entire corporation. An unlikely ending, surprising, and profoundly human. Months later, Ethan stepped back into the same elevator where it had all begun. This time, he wasn't crying. He found Marjorie organizing a small box of cleaning supplies, now merely symbolic, as she had been promoted to the corporate integrity department. "Ready for another day?" he asked. She smiled. "Always." The doors closed, reflecting two people transformed not by power, but by the courage to confront difficult truths. As the elevator ascended, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The future, at last, seemed clear. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who also needs to remember that acts of courage, even the most silent ones, can transform entire destinies. Reflect on how many truths go unnoticed around us and how many lives change when someone decides to act with integrity. Leave your comment, tell us how this journey impacted you and which parts stirred the most emotions. Stories like this gain strength when they reach other people. Thank you for following along this far. Now it's your turn. What did you learn from Ethan, Marjorie, and Leonard?